businesses are started by people who have a really high level of skill at doing a particular thing.
Sure.
So just, for example, let's take someone who's a painter. They've developed a high level of skill. They're a really great painter. And they say, you know what, I don't want to work for someone else anymore. I want to be my own boss, or I see the opportunity or whatever. And so I'm going to go open a painting business. And there's nothing wrong with being a great painter. The problem is that being a great painter is not at all the same as running a great painting business.
Right. Hey, welcome back to the Shift Podcast. I'm Evan Weiland with my co-host, Matt Ware. Matt, today we're going to talk about the difference between self-employed and business owner.
And there is a difference.
There is a difference.
Right?
Yep.
I think so many entrepreneurs, they think that just because they have opened a business, that they own a business. And, technically, legally, that's true. But what we believe, what we've seen in our experience is that there's a huge difference between somebody who is self-employed and somebody who actually owns a business, has the mindset, has the perspective, has the operational skill, all of those things to really run a business.
Matt, how would you describe the difference between these two? Or maybe is it just semantics?
Well, it's a good question. And, I realize that as people are watching and listening, they may feel a little bit
triggered.
Yeah, or like we're stepping on their toes or something. So I would maybe just kind of de-escalate the situation, by saying, first of all, we don't have all the answers to this, right? We don't know everything there is to know about it. But I think a lot of it really, from my perspective, comes down to the focus that business owner has. I think, generally speaking, I would say that someone who is self-employed, they're focused on doing the tasks that have to be done today. Whereas somebody who truly is a business owner, they're really thinking more about how they build their business for tomorrow, for the future.
Yeah. So a phrase that you and I often use is working in the business or working on the business.
Right.
And the goal is to stop working in the business and begin working on the business.
Yep.
And we want to emphasize that in this podcast today.
And, that phrase, working on the business and not just in the business, it comes from the classic business book called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, stands for the entrepreneurial myth, an absolute must read. If you've never read that book, stop what you're doing. In fact, stop listening to the podcast, go get the book, read that, and then come back, because maybe some of the things we're talking about will make even a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
But the basic premise of the book, Evan, right? Because you've read it.
Yeah. So I was just about to say, full disclosure, I haven't read it, so this is going to be fun for me.
Yeah. So Evan's now going to be stepping off the podcast to go read the book. He'll join me again in a few minutes. But all right, well, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. So this is for Evan, but also, if you're watching or listening, this will help you too. So Michael Gerber in the book, his basic premise is that oftentimes businesses are started by people who have a really high level of skill at doing a particular thing.
Sure.
Right. So they're technically skilled at doing a specific task. And maybe they've done it for a long time. They've worked for someone else doing it. And for whatever reason, they want to take that step and open a business doing that thing that they're technically skilled at doing. So just, for example, let's take someone who's a painter, right? They paint houses. They've been working for a painting company for a long time. They've developed a high level of skill. They're a really great painter. And they say, you know what, I don't want to work for someone else anymore. I want to be my own boss, or I see the opportunity or whatever. And so I'm going to go open a painting business. The problem is that unless they're really focused, unless they're really intentional, unless they've got a plan, most likely that, and there's nothing wrong with being a great painter. The problem is that being a great painter is not at all the same as running a great painting business. Right. These are actually different things entirely.
Yeah,
it's a
completely.
different mindset and a different skill set. And so that's the shift that we want to talk about.
So Matt, it sounds to me like you're saying making the shift from technician to owner.
Right. Yep.
And if we don't make that shift, it's like working 40 hours for someone else and trading that for working 80 hours for ourselves. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And we've all known people who have done that, right? I mean, take this example that I gave of the painter, right? If they just continue to focus on trying to be a good painter, probably they could have worked less hours and maybe even made more money just working for someone else.
Totally.
For the allure of freedom and being their own boss and all this stuff, they traded that to actually work themselves, to the bone. When they may not really be growing a business. They're just focused on continuing to be, technically good at that skill.
Yeah. I'd love to jump in here with sort of an exercise for the audience. It's an exercise, but it's going to be for mindset. So it's the exercise of adding up your hours, what you pay yourself, because everybody listening has probably been in business for a year. Add that up. Find out what you actually pay yourself per hour. It's probably going to be $15 an hour.
Right. Yeah. When you realize you're working for less than minimum wage.
Yeah. Then it's painful enough for them to make a shift. So Matt, according to the Small Business Administration, I have some notes here. Only 20% of small businesses ever manage to scale beyond the self-employed stage. That's nuts.
Yeah, which is crazy. And actually, when we were prepping for this podcast, I looked up the stat, and last year in the U.S., there were over 5 million new businesses started.
Wow.
So 5 million new businesses, but only 20% of them are ever going to get to, out of that self-employed stage. So that means there are 4 million businesses just this last year that started, they're never going to make it past this stage. And you and I have been there, right?
Yeah.
At different, iterations of our entrepreneurial journey. And so, we were talking about this off camera. I think, in full transparency, we want to make sure that we're saying, like, hey, we cast no judgment on anybody who's watching or listening if you find yourself in that place, because in certain aspects of our business, we are there or have been there. And it's not even a one and done, right? When you start a new business venture, you might start over again at the self-employed sort of stage before you can move really into having business ownership in terms of your approach and your mindset. And so that's normal. And so we definitely don't want anybody to feel like we're like talking down to them, because we're in this with them, right? And we're, again, just a part of this podcast is just sort of sharing our journey with people. But what we also believe is that most entrepreneurs don't want to stay there, right? I mean, you're watching, you're listening, you probably want to grow your business. You probably have, if you're anything like Evan and I, some frustration with staying at this self-employed stage, and you want to break out of that. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Yellowstone. John Dutton, played by Kevin Costner, he says that there's a difference between working the ranch and running the ranch. And the shift we want to help you make is from working it to running it.
So 2 things that we want to talk about for making this shift from self-employed to business owner.
Okay.
Mindset.
Yep.
And skill set.
Yep. It's a good way to say it.
Let me open us up with this mindset thing. I think that the number one mindset that's holding self-employed people back from becoming business owners is thinking that they are the best at what they do and that no one else can do it better than them. Let me kind of paint a picture here. This is the guy or the gal that's really, really good at what they do. They're working for someone else. Maybe they do the math and they find out how much money the owner's making, and all
or
the
how
upside,
much they think the owner's making. Which, usually isn't as much as they think.
All this perceived upside, right? They don't see the back end, working until midnight on the books or whatever it may be. Or trying to figure out that marketing campaign for the 5th time. But they decide to go out on their own. And I want to slow down here. I think that people fail to go from self-employed to business owner because the reason that they started the business 5 years ago is not the same reason that they still own the business today. And they haven't changed their mind about that. They haven't slowed down enough to say, why am I still doing this? And is it for the same reason as I started?
Interesting. So when you say that, I mean, from your perspective, you just highlighted a lot of times why people started. Why would they still be doing the business 5 years later? And how is that different?
So again, maybe they started it because they're really good at what they do.
Yeah.
They thought they had a shot. Maybe they didn't reassess why they're still doing it today. I think we're going to highlight that in the next couple minutes in this podcast, but it needs to simply be for a new reason. is my point.
Yeah.
It can't be for the old reason.
Interesting. So would you say the reasons for being in business or staying in business evolve over time?
Exactly right. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Wow. That's an interesting thought. So if you're watching or listening and you haven't reevaluated in a long time why you're doing what you're doing, this may be sort of an action step to take coming out of this episode, is to say, okay, why am I doing this? You know, what you're describing about that business owner who is having a hard time making this shift because this is something I hear a lot when I'm consulting and coaching business owners. This is something I run into all the time, and a lot of times they're afraid to let someone else do the work because they really do think they're the best at it. And that makes sense because, like you said, the reason they started the business was they were so skilled in this thing, and they're still thinking like a technician. They're still thinking like the person who's supposed to be doing this thing.
Such a good way to put it.
And it becomes their Achilles heel. It's like the same thing that they were so good at that got them to open a business is actually the very thing that will keep them from making the jump to truly being an owner of the business.
It's the Chinese handcuffs.
Right. That's a great way to say it.
To put a pin in that point, this individual is insisting that they do the work themselves, or at least have like really strict oversight.
Yeah.
Right? They don't like the idea of hiring a project manager because in their mind, they are the best project manager that could exist.
Yeah.
There's a name for that. It's called micromanaging. And because they insist on doing the work themselves or having direct oversight to that work, they're really just limiting their own growth in themselves and their business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, there's a little bit of maybe some arrogance in it, if we're being honest.
There might be someone else out there that can do it as good as them.
With 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah, with 8 billion.
You think maybe there's somebody who could do it as well, or God forbid, maybe even a little better than you do.
Well, let's be realistic. In the United States, 300 million plus.
Right.
Maybe they could find someone.
Right. So I think it's funny when we talk about it, right? Because it seems so obvious when you're kind of in a detached place.
Yeah.
But when you're in it every day, it's a really easy trap to fall into. And, of course, we fall into that trap ourselves. I think it is the mindset shift, though, that we have to make to realize, like, I was good enough at something to get the business open. But if I don't start to hire, train, develop, empower other people, the capacity of the business is going to be whatever my personal capacity is, right? It doesn't matter how good I am. I still only have 24 hours in a day and I have to sleep and I have to eat. And so no matter how good I am at this thing, the business will always be limited by my personal ability to do that thing unless I totally shift the mindset and change my perspective on it.
I think it's delegation is the big concept here. But it's the scariest thing in the world to hire your first person. What would you say to someone who is listening? They know that they need to be delegating, whether it's because they're exhausted or they're growing, and they just can't do it all on their own, and they need to find a practical way to clone themselves. What would you say to that person?
First of all, I would say this. I don't like the word delegate or delegation because I think it tends to give off this connotation of, I don't want to do this thing, so I'm going to find somebody else to just pass it off on. I prefer the word empower.
Okay.
I would rather empower people because in my mind, and again, this could be semantics, but in my mind, empower means I'm not just handing you stuff I don't want to do. I'm actually going to train you, equip you, give you everything you need to really go knock it out of the park. And if we're being honest and we leave our ego out of it, we would actually want other people to be even better than we are at it because it makes the business better.
That's stepping on toes.
Well, it is. And I'm not saying it's easy, right? Because I think we all have that insecurity, like we want to be the best. I think here's the question. Do you want to be the best in your own mind, or do you want the business to grow? Because those might be incompatible ideas.
Yeah, they are.
So I love what Andrew Carnegie said, right? He was the great, businessman from 100 plus years ago. He said this. He said, no person will make a great business who wants to do it all himself or get all the credit.
Yeah.
And so I think that maybe is one of the challenges is if I want to do it all myself or I want to get all the credit, I've now handcuffed myself to not building a great business.
Yeah. Well, Henry Ford talks about it. I don't know the exact quote, but he talks about finding the best people. Like I'm not good at this. I just find the best people to do it. Yeah. So he understood the power of empowering other people.
Absolutely.
Harvard Business Review says this: 70% of entrepreneurs say delegation is key to growth. So it's really, really crazy that they know it's important conceptually, but they're not out there intentionally hiring people and empowering other people.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, if you're listening, you're watching right now, you can say, well, yeah, I mean, obviously I know I've got to delegate or empower, whatever word you want to use. So I think it's one thing to know it. It's another thing to actually go do it. Right. I mean, of course, as people of faith, we know the Bible has something to say about this, right? Like hearing the word is one thing, but doing the word is actually where it's at. And I think that's a principle that's not just a spiritual principle, that's in every area of life. Knowledge by itself is not going to change anything. It's not until knowledge becomes action that things begin to transform in our lives and in our businesses. So, it's great for us to sit around and talk about empowering people. Where the rubber meets the road is when we actually go do it. So that's a little bit about the mindset, right, that we've got to have. Let's shift gears a little bit and move into talking about the skill set.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because there's mindset and skill set. And I like that we started with mindset because, frankly, from my perspective, the skill set doesn't matter if you don't have the right mindset. So if I had to tell somebody where to start, I would say start changing your mindset first. Mm-hmm. But let's assume that our audience, okay, they've got that mindset. Now skill set. What do you think are some of the most critical skills for someone who wants, they're currently in that kind of self-employed state, but they want to move into truly being a business owner?
To dive into the topic of skill set, I want to make the distinction between two different characters. And one role is one who has domain expertise, the painter, the professional painter.
So that's the technician we talked about earlier. Okay.
Right. And the second character, that second role, is one who has business acumen. Okay.
Ooh, good word,
yeah,
acumen.
It's a big word. They have business acumen. They have an entire toolbox that they can open up and reach into and say, finance, I've got it. Marketing, yep, I've learned a few things there. Sales, I understand that. And they can reach it. Leadership, I can reach in and grab that when I need to. And so they have real business acumen. And I think that this is a person with a completely different mindset. In order for them to have
skill
that,
set.
And skill set, yes. And so yes, they go hand in hand. And so again, picture that. Domain expert, I'm a really good painter, or I've been an HVAC technician for the last 25 years. And that's why I'm running this business.
Or to use the Michael Gerber book, the E-Myth, I'm a really good pie baker.
Pie baker. Right. The one that I haven't read yet.
Yeah.
He keeps, rubbing it in my face.
Which having a piece of pie right now actually sounds really good, but I digress.
So an easy way, I think, there's so many frameworks for business. I think a really easy framework for sort of sharpening the knife of business acumen is people, product, process. And so for any self-employed individual out there listening, think anywhere that you have a problem in your business. You may be having a problem with marketing, not getting enough leads. God only knows that's a problem for a lot of people.
Right.
Think product, process, people, or people, product, process. You may not have a people problem. Maybe it's you that's doing the outreach or doing the email marketing campaign or running the ads. You may not be the problem. It might be the process. Maybe you're running the ads in a way that that isn't reaching people, right? You may have a bad message to market match. Think about the way that you're budgeting and running your business. This is a big one. A lot of self-employed people pull all their money out of their business. Yeah. Why?
Oh, yeah.
Because they're doing it for themselves, right? Yeah. And they're not thinking ahead into the future like a business person would think. They don't have that skill set in their toolbox. And so this really prevents you from flying as a business owner. You need working capital. The worst time to go to the bank is when you need money.
Right. Yeah. You're in a much stronger negotiating position if you don't need it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The worst time to go to the bank is when you need it. The best time to go to the bank is when you don't need
Negotiate your terms way ahead of time.
They'll hand you money if you don't need it.
Right.
And so keep money set aside, but that takes business acumen.
It does. Yeah. Okay. So you're saying from a framework perspective, people, product, process,
Yeah.
and that if there's an issue in any area of business, it probably comes down to one of those three things.
It's in one of those three areas.
So then let me ask you this. When it comes to business acumen and really understanding those things, the people, the product, the process, is that something that entrepreneurs, business owners, whatever, are they naturally good at those things? Is that something you're born with? Like you just have a natural proclivity to it? Or are those things that you can learn and develop and grow?
Yes.
Okay. It's short answer, folks.
Yes. So it's both. It's definitely both. I think we both know, being people of faith, that we're gifted. I, for one, I love seeing processes. It's still a skill that I'm sharpening. Or it's a knife that I'm sharpening, but I can see processes. I love to fix things because I can see the processes, where it's broken, where it's not broken. Some people struggle with that. But I think all skills, whether you're born with it or it's something that you can acquire over time, we've got to do some kind of an assessment to find out what we're good at.
Yeah.
And Matt, it's a big conversation. The topic between strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah,
and
it is.
Should we just double down on the strengths and ignore the weaknesses and hope that someone else is there to do them? Right. Or should we really work on the weaknesses so that they can become strengths? Yeah. But the reality is,
do a whole episode on that sometime.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. The reality is we have both, and there's no ignoring that. But I think it is good to assess and find out what you're naturally good at.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I remember one time, John Maxwell was asked the question, are leaders born or made? And his, sort of quippy response was, well, all leaders have to be born, right? So yes, it has to start somewhere. And so yes, there's this innate ability that everybody has that's unique, that we believe is given to them by God. But there's also things that you can grow in and learn. And I think, you don't have to look, any further than the athletic world to see that, right? Like there are people who are just naturally gifted athletes.
Yeah.
But to really be the best of the best, they have to couple their natural gifting with a lot of hard work and development.
Yep.
And it's when those two things get married that you really see elite performance. And I think, the same thing is true for business owners. There's going to be things you're naturally good at, but then there's things that you've got to work at. And so I don't think it's either or. I think it's a little bit of both and I think it comes out in different seasons of your life too. I mean, and again, maybe we'll talk about this another time, but I think in different seasons of your journey, you're going to focus on your strengths and either ignore or just hire to your weaknesses. But then there's other times in your journey where you say, you know what, that sounded good, but if I don't fix this weakness, if I don't make this better, it's my Achilles heel and I've got to do something about it. So I don't think it's always a black and white thing. I think it can be different parts of your journey. And that's just got to be something that you become very aware of. I think sometimes the issue is this. I think for some business owners, it is easy. We've talked about this, before. Because entrepreneurs tend to be so self-sufficient and self-reliant, and frankly, that's required to do what we do. The downside of that is we can tend to overestimate our abilities and really be blind to our blind spots, right? Because we're going to charge ahead and we're going to do all of that. And that can get us in a lot of trouble. But I think we can also sometimes underestimate our ability to grow. Like we get really honest with ourselves and say, man, I really suck at this, but not realizing like, man, with some work and some effort, I could get better. Like I can grow in this thing. So, I mean, I can speak to that for myself. I was not always naturally good with people. When I was a younger leader, my tendency was to be very task focused, to be very focused on productivity and efficiency. And over time, I realized in leadership roles, I had to get better at working with people and seeing people grow. And that required a big shift for me. And so it didn't come naturally. I had to dig in. I had to learn. I had to have mentors and coaches come alongside me and help me. And I'm not there yet, but I'm a long way from where I used to be. I'm much better now and much more comfortable dealing with people, leading people, building teams, maximizing other people's strengths and all of that. And so to your point, yes, it is both. You've got natural abilities as well as things you can grow in. And I guess to kind of bring this full circle, the point that I think we're trying to make is there is a whole different set of skills that are required to move from just being self-employed as a technician to truly being a business owner, but you can develop those skills. You can grow in those things. Business acumen can be developed.
So Matt, to wrap up, in today's episode, we've talked about the difference in self-employed and business owner. We've talked about mindset and skill set. And then we've also discussed this contrast between the technician or the domain expert and its counterpart, the person with business acumen. Hey, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Shift Podcast. Be sure to like and share and subscribe so you won't miss next week's episode. You can find us at theshiftpodcast.co, and we'll see you on the next one.